For every Empire Strikes Back, there's Short Circuit 2. For every Lethal Weapon 2, there's Die Hard 2. For every Terminator 2, there is a Robocop 2. Hello YouTubers, here's a new action reaction in which I go over my thoughts of Robocop 2. Here we go. Robocop 2 takes place a few months after Robocop defeated Clarence Bodiger and Dick Jones. Several issues make his job far from done. The Detroit police are on strike, crime is rampant, and the OCP is both developing a new cyborg officer to replace Murphy and ready to begin construction of Delta City to replace Detroit. To make matters worse, a new group of criminals led by a man named Kane is spreading a new drug called Nuke. Robocop and his partner Ann Lewis must get the Detroit police back on its feet, defy OCP, and stop Kane. But OCP may have special plans for Kane as well. Robocop is directed by Irvin Kershner. Peter Weller reprises his role as Alex Murphy / Robocop. Nancy Allen returns as Ann Lewis. Belinda Bauer plays Dr. Juliet Fax, and Tom Noonan plays Kane. So yeah, that's pretty much what Robocop 2 is about. This was made a couple of years after the original. The original came out in 1987, this came out in 1990. And Paul Verhoeven did not come back to direct. They asked the writer and director to come back, and Paul Verhoeven kind of felt uncomfortable coming back right away to do a sequel. He wanted it to be as innovative and original as the first film, which I don't blame him. He didn't agree with what the studio wanted, and he felt it would be a cash grab. So instead, he went on to direct Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger. We all saw how that turned out. Great. So they were looking for a writer-director, so they end up looking towards Frank Miller, the writer who did Dark Knight Returns, Ronin, and eventually would do Sin City. So they got him to write the film. He actually wrote Robocop 2 and 3, but he wrote the second one first. And eventually the producers found it to be unfilmable, so they revised the hell out of it. So much that it's unrecognizable, and you could definitely tell that it messed with his work because he is much better than this film. And it's just a travesty. But they did get Irvin Kershner to direct it. He did Never Say Never Again, and famously, The Empire Strikes Back. While Robocop 2 is no Empire Strikes Back, it does have some of the visual flair that Empire Strikes Back had, and you could definitely tell that Irvin Kershner directed it as far as the look of the film and the feel. Ultimately, this is one of those sequels that falls short in my opinion. There are certain things that I do like about Robocop 2 a lot, but it's almost one of those missed opportunities. There's so much stuff in the story that they could have gone with the character. And ultimately, it feels like it's a step backward from Robocop. Robocop, Alex Murphy, died for our sins and was resurrected. Paul Verhoeven called him a Jesus Christ figure. So you have some part of this man in a machine element to the first Robocop. He gets his humanity back. And this one doesn't explore that any further. There's a brief flashback scene to where he sees himself getting killed, and he meets his wife. He keeps stalking his wife. His wife's like, "Are you Alex Murphy? Are you my husband?" And it's a heart-wrenching scene where he tells her, "No, I'm not your husband. Your husband died." But you could tell that there's still a part of that man there, and they don't get to explore it any further. And there's just so much he could have done with that story. It's a heartbreaking, tragic scene because he knows he has to move on and let her have her own life. But it's just kind of tragic in a way, and they don't really get to explore that fully. But my main beef with the film, besides the story, is it's not a very good film, and Robocop is just like a dumbed down machine. You don't see the Alex Murphy part of him that you did at the end of the first Robocop. And in a way, he's not as strong either as he was in the original film. The original film, he was like crashing people through walls, shooting, and all this stuff. And here he's really, really weak, except for one or two sequences in the middle and then the end. And I wish you got to see more of the Robocop from the other film. Writing, rise, and story, it's very weak compared to the predecessor. But I do like Peter Weller's performance. They gave him a fiberglass suit that looks more metallic. It has a blue element to it. I like the silver a bit better, but it does have a more metallic look. You can tell he can move a lot more fluidly in this film. I also like when he gets reprogrammed in a certain part of the film. There's a lot of funny humor there, even though I wish it didn't happen to Robocop. There's a lot of funny no smoking jokes and things like that. Anne Lewis is great. Nancy Allen is always great as Anne Lewis, but she doesn't really get much to do here, and I really wish she got a little bit more to do in the film. Kane, yeah, the villain Kane. You may recognize him from Last Action Hero and Heat. Yeah, he actually is a pretty good villain. He's kind of cheesy, but I like it because he's just kind of larger than life, but not in a really bad childish way, just like he's just larger than life as his gang leader. He has this posse that he's with. And I feel like he is actually a very underrated part of Robocop 2. I like Kane, especially when he's a human. He ends up getting turned to the second Robocop and then going rogue, and then you have like a shoot 'em up fest at the end of the film. But when he's a human Kane, I like it. It's a human adversary to go against Robocop. It's everything that's opposite of him. And in a way, he's almost like a Clarence Boddicker 2.0. Except he's basically owning the streets. There's police on strike. And what I liked about the original, and not many people, including the filmmakers of the sequels, understood this, the first Robocop is a satire. This one tries to play a little bit too seriously at times, but you do get some of the satirical elements. John Glover, you may see him in Smallville. He's in Scrooge, Gremlins 2, and plays the voice of the Riddler. Very funny car commercial. They have the commercials and the news. And there's a lot of statements about corporations, which would end up being true now. I mean, Detroit's about to go bankrupt, and it's like modern-day Detroit, basically, in Robocop 2. And they want to replace it with Delta City, and it shows how corporations go and want to basically just, like, throw away everything and make everything a corporate commodity. And I like that. It has certain political elements in there that are still very relevant today. But ultimately, the action, I like the action, but some of the effects are not done as well as stop motion, especially towards the end. It just looks really, really bad. But I do like some of the action between Robocop and Kane when he's Robocop 2. Very reminiscent and pre-Iron Man at that time. I also like the shootout at the drug factory. That was cool in the sniper mode. I just don't like Robocop getting his ass kicked and being weak. How a little kid and this gang beats him up. And I'm like, what? It would not happen to the first Robocop. First Robocop would have kicked their asses. That's another crazy thing about the story. They have this kid here who's like, he's a kid. He's basically like a pre-adolescent kid who's like shooting cops and everything. It's just horrific. And it is a little bad, but in a way, I kind of like how it's horrific. It shows like how bad it really is, and that's just something very different that I have not seen a film try to do. This is a hardcore film, and that surprises me from Irvin Kershner. In a way, some parts of it are a little bit more extreme than the original Robocop. The score, it's an okay score, but they didn't have the score from the first or third films. That dun 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 dun. That is not in this film. So it's like dun 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 dun, and it just sounds like a Saturday morning cartoon. Something about it doesn't sound Robocop to me. It's like when you watch the Tim Burton Batmans and then they have Elliot Goldenthal's theme instead of Danny Elfman's, and something about it just feels off. That's what it feels like to me. Even though Peter Weller does come back, and it is right after the first one. And then the OCP president is like an evil, like corporate, he's an evil corporate boss now, and he didn't really come across that way. Sure, they can be extreme being corporate and high class, but he didn't seem like he wanted to destroy the world or have violence. That was odd. And then the whole doctor storyline of wanting another Robocop and sleeping with him, I just didn't like it. And then the mayor, I don't know. It just seemed like the whole plan backfired to have this Robocop 2, and then nobody really panics too much when it goes bad. It's just bad press that they have to cover up. But I really wish, you could tell there's certain underlying themes here that are just beckoning to come out, and I really wish they based it off of Frank Miller's. I really would have loved to see what his film would have been like, or if Paul Verhoeven came back. But you can get Frank Miller's story. It's under a graphic novel called Frank Miller's Robocop, in which his original ideas for Robocop 2 and 3. I haven't checked it out personally, but I really am anxious to see it after seeing how the sequels turned out. But yeah, sequels are very rarely as good as the original. This one has some of the same feeling as far as the violence, but even though it's rated R and has the same Robocop, it doesn't feel Robocop to me personally. I know a lot of fans love Robocop 2, but it's not a very good film and not as strong as the first one. It lacked the soul and spine that the first Robocop had. Even Peter Weller said it himself that something was missing in this one that made the first film special. They needed a morality tale. It just became like a giant shoot 'em up. Basically, like what usual sequels do, like Die Hard 2, where you basically have it rated R and you just have more violence, more blood, more language, more action, and the more you have, the better you hope it's going to be. And really, it's the little things that count, and that's what made the first Robocop special. It is a hardcore film, but it's not all that, and Robocop 2 seemed to miss the mark on that. And it's hard because the first Robocop is a revenge movie, and very rarely do you have a good follow-up after a good revenge movie. It's very hard to do that after everything is kind of resolved in the first. But ultimately, what bogged this down to me, besides a weak story and just the way they took the characters and the content, is the direction of Alex Murphy / Robocop. I didn't like him getting his ass kicked. I didn't like the way they had his character as a machine. He is a machine, but he got some of his humanity back in one. And even though Robocop 3 is considered in many ways worse than Robocop 2, at least Robocop 3 remembered that, and Robocop 2 didn't remember that. But I do like some of, again, the political stuff, and then with the drugs, that's something very different. The police are on strike, and having a drug war and the streets being rampant with them, especially during the 80s, is a pretty cool statement, and it's something that's bigger for Robocop to take on, and that stuff I did like. Robocop 2, that design was okay, but personally I thought Ed 209 would have been like a better Robocop 2. The fact that they had to have another Robocop, I don't know, I just didn't really buy. It was cool seeing the fight, but some of the effects during it, especially when they go outside the roof, are just a little bad. But I do like some of the stop motion, and that part in the elevator is great. The action is actually done really well in those parts. But yeah, the story is what bogs down Robocop 2 for me, and really is what makes it inferior to the original film. All the films, though, in this trilogy are better than the remake in my opinion, but this is nowhere near the first Robocop at all, even though you have some of the same people. I really wish Paul Verhoeven would come back and they would be patient enough to wait till he got done with Total Recall to make Robocop 2. I felt like it would have been something really special, and they could have done something to elevate the character. But, I mean, that's not asking for much, because the first movie was not like an Oscar award-winning movie anyway. But I just know that they could have done better with the material they had. And it's sad to see that this was another one of the 90s casualties as far as like being a sequel to an 80s film to not be as good going into the 90s. And this started with 1990. And yeah, I really wish the sequels were as good, or at least near the first Robocop. But I do like that it's rated R and has a lot of the brutality, if not more brutality, than the first film. But it's not all that what makes it a good movie or a story. So Robocop, in my opinion, gets a C+ and a 2 out of 5. It's not the best movie. It has some action that's worthwhile, but it's nowhere near the quality of the original film, and that's just a sad thing. It's one of those sequels that's just like not as good as the first. It's not your Dark Knight or Empire Strikes Back or Godfather 2 or even Terminator 2. Robocop 2 is one of those sequels that ultimately tries to think that because you have more language, more violence, more of this, and more of everything, that's going to make it better than the original, which case it does not. It makes it inferior to the original. And it lacks something that the original had that made the original special, not only with the story, but also the satire, just everything. Anyway, that is my reaction of Robocop 2. Let me know what you think of Robocop 2. Have you seen it? Some of you out there may like it. It's not a bad movie. Not the worst film ever, but it's just not as good as the other one, and certain elements of it have not aged well as the first, and it's just, I feel like it's one of those missed opportunities for me personally, but I do know the film has its fans, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What are your favorite RoboCop films out of the trilogy? And yeah, if you like this, feel free to subscribe, like, and check out my other videos. And tune in for the next action reaction in which I'll be going over Die Hard 2, Die Harder, and RoboCop 3. Till next time.